Hello, friends. Thank you for tuning into the Odd Thoughts Podcast. At the Odd Thoughts Podcast, we like to talk about the everyday odd thoughts, have conversations on relatable topics, and discuss whatever comes to mind. My name is Gunther, and I am your host. Welcome to episode 37. For episode 37, I started off by talking about maybe the plausibility of surviving a blizzard, kind of the extremities that you'll face, and maybe the certain level of preparedness you should have. Then I wanted to transition into talking a little bit about maybe one day me having kids. I definitely want kids, and I kind of have some self-doubts, but I know that I'll do my best to be the best parent I can. Then I transitioned into talking or having fun discussing an idea I had for my own Christmas movie. I always have ideas for movies. I try to, and some more underdone than others, but this was kind of fun to think about. I made up my own Christmas movie basically, and just wanted to know what y'all thought. Then, lastly, I ended it on talking about holiday traveling during the Christmas season, one of the most chaotic times of year to travel. But a lot of people do it. Over 100 million people travel per year, and which is hectic. So, if you want to listen to any of these topics, I appreciate you tuning in. Please enjoy. How's everybody doing though? I hope everybody's doing good. Getting closer to Christmas. I know I keep saying that every episode, but I just hope it's good for y'all, and I hope that things are going right. It'll be better one day, I promise. I know it's hard to hear it from a stranger. Trust me, it'll all be better one day. The work you put in is not just for some job that pays bills, right? It's you put in work for their everyday existence, the pulling through to the next day. And I promise it's worth it. Effort is what we must have as people. It's what we must do. And what comes out of that effort is sometimes out of our hands. It's not a great feeling to surrender to the natures of life, right? And it's something we can't stop though. We are cursed to know that we are affected severely as humans in certain situations, and we're not always going to be privy to ways we can persevere. It's not always going to be maybe most prominent. Undoubtedly, pieces of you will chip away over time, and people come and go in groups at times. The way of survival varies from doable to impossible at a whim's notice. The suffering is all for nothing, though. Just remember that we suffered to then show us how capable we really are. There wasn't anything that said you were entitled to XYZ. We as people, we just have to do our best to endure. When you're born, there's nothing that says that you're truly going to be able to do everything that leads to what you think you deserve, or everything you do doesn't lead to something that you think you deserve. We just have to have these harshnesses of life and endure these harshnesses of life, and we're just doing our best to push against those forces. Endurance is one of the basics of human survival. What wants to flatten us to the surface isn't enough to stop you from planting your feet and launching through. Use those rocky bottoms that we inevitably face and push back. Let those rocks sediment into a hardened surface for which there is no further descent. There's only one way but up. I promise it'll be better only after we choose to be the direct afflicting force against the negatives that pursue our downfall. We are human and we are resilient. We just have to do our best to push against the negatives. Like I said, it'll be better one day. It's something I have to tell myself a lot. It helps me out. It's not always great, but it's something I try to remember. But yeah, I hope y'all are still doing good. I'm doing okay. I've kind of started getting a little bit better about I've talked about in some previous intros and stuff like that in some previous episodes about trying to work ahead a little bit. But I'm starting to take a couple more steps in that. The outlines are kind of flowing a little easier, it feels like, which is something that I think I've struggled the most is like trying to come up with outlines, and I don't feel like maybe I have like enough of them at times, or they're just kind of underdone, and I just be questioning topics sometimes. Like I'll like look at different like multiple outlines and I'll like switch topics in between them. I'll like cut it from this episode and put it in this episode and move this one over there. And so it's a lot of self doubt is what I really realize. And it's kind of there's just like I have to have a willingness, and I sometimes don't have that willingness to kind of put myself out there and want to have like a underdone idea. And I've talked about how sometimes I doubt myself in between topics. Sometimes I don't feel like I'm as good in certain topics and too sporadic with my ideas. So sometimes it's hard to think that, like, even when I think I have a good outline, it's hard to think that I have like the perfect thing to make an episode the way I want it or whatever. But I just gotta kind of know that when I do my outlines, I have like a certain nature of language, right? That if I keep myself to that consistent kind of language, that as I read these topics and I kind of go through, it makes it a little easier. It makes it like I can transition into things a little easier, and I don't feel as like underdone in my topics. And like the last couple episodes, I've done better with my outlines a little bit, and I'm trying to enact that as much as possible, and still trying to keep the free form, thoughts going as I stumble across, stumble through every day, every episode. But it's just one of those things where, it's I'm getting a little bit better about it, and it's giving me more confidence to like write outlines and do better outlines and stuff like that. So I am getting better at it, and I'm only hoping for like 2024. Like I'm not waiting until then, but it's like I'm kind of working up to that. Then 2024, I have that whole year to make it simpler, and I have everything a little more like worked out. And I don't know if I have any outlines for my New Year's, and if hopefully the last episode I'll do before New Year's, or maybe the one I post on the New Year, the first day, will be like my New Year's resolutions. I don't necessarily always like thoroughly like put myself salute in goals like that, and I want goals, but like sometimes it feels like when you're waiting around for the new year to start things, it's weird. But I know that in 2024 there are generally things that I want, and I want to hopefully enact, and I want like outcomes for. So at least I'm gonna talk about that. I ain't gonna talk about everything like that. I'm gonna be able. Things aren't always gonna be perfect, and but I like it with as my mental health has kind of changed, and the way I've thought about things have kind of changed, and it's not perfect and I struggle still, but yeah, I feel better about 2024, and I feel like I can actually do the things I want to do. It's just about doing those things. But yeah, anyways, enough rambling. Let's go ahead and hop into episode 37. Living in Texas, the worst kind of weather we might get during the winter is some mid 20s temperatures, maybe lower a little, some icy conditions, and kind of maybe like the tiniest bit of snow usually. Now, those conditions do kind of suck to deal with, but I really couldn't imagine living in a place where snow becomes like a actual dangerous factor. I was born in Minnesota, and I moved back there like a few years ago during the winter time, and all I can say is it gets pretty miserable. Blizzards, snowstorms can really bring in an unwanted hecticness during the winter season. Mother Nature does not care about you and will enact the extremities of weather that cannot be handled perfectly, right? Whenever she wants. When the weather hits, there is only so much we can really do that we're only able to handle. Surviving a blizzard is not easy to think about doing, and but maybe with a little preparation, you can feel safe in the worst case scenarios. If you live in an area where snow gets abundant, it's probably best to prepare for that kind of stuff. Yeah, I definitely couldn't imagine really surviving through some heavy snow. Like when I lived in Minnesota, it got pretty bad, but felt like it was there's obviously places in the world that's way worse. And when you kind of really think about in general just extreme weather, right? Not just like snowstorms, but hurricanes and tornadoes. That's just crazy. And I don't think there's really any perfect level of like preparedness maybe that you can be. You can have all these kind of extra equipments, and you might, stock up on certain supplies, but it feels like there's no perfect scenario or perfect way. But surviving a blizzard is something I never want to do. Surviving a winter storm making it through a blizzard, whatever, or having to deal with any extreme weather really. But being snowed in, just thinking about that kind of isolation, right? And I mean, hopefully, maybe it blows over a couple of days and or a day. You just get that kind of heavy snow, and then as the sun kind of comes up, it melts away. But there are places where it feels that people get packed in for days, and they have to prepare. You have to think ahead. I don't know. Kind of, I like to think about. I have a certain level of like survival instinct. You know what I'm saying? Like I think you have to have a I mean, some people are just maybe like, you maybe wouldn't think of it necessarily when you live in this place, but when it comes to nature, then it's like it's not a question, right? If you move to a place, you might necessarily think like, oh, I'm getting a lot of snow, so I have to prepare. But when worse comes to worse, you'd want to be prepared. So I think, you would want to have you should always have a little level of survival instinct, right? And definitely know that if you live in some of these places or you're gonna move to some a place like where there's some pretty heavy snow or it's plausible that blizzards can be, make sure that you have some proper preparation. That's fair to say. In the United States, like the Rocky Mountains, upper Midwest, kind of like the Great Lakes region, kind of those are where like snow gets really bad. Northeastern states, kind of the northern plains. It feels like that's where snow gets pretty bad, like Minnesota, where I'm from. But like Russia, I bet it's pretty bad there. Some of the northern parts of Canada, Canada in general, maybe, right? So there's a lot of places that are probably worse. But in all idealisticness, that you would be prepared, right? If you knew that this was a plausible thing, you'd be able to be ready for whatever happens, even to the minimal to the minimalness and to the maximum. But like what's worst case scenario, right? Let's say extreme cold, right? You get to those freezing temperatures below zero, it freezes your pipes or something like that, shuts off the power, that can even like if when the snow eventually comes in, that can damage your house. That's like 100% a thing where, your roof can cave in or something like that, or it's just that those forces of winds, it can hurt. I definitely don't. I can't even think about that. Like going through that. I mean, like road closures. That's something that in Texas we deal with the iciness, but where literally like snow is like piled on top of roads, right? Just like I said, pipes freezing, power outages. That's just stuff's crazy, and you know that like you're gonna be stuck, and everybody else is stuck, right? So all the places are closed, and there's no emergency vehicles, and you got to think about that kind of stuff. And hopefully, yeah, right, dude. I mean, I know it's kind of freaky to think about. I like sometimes thinking about this kind of stuff. Kind of it freaks me out a little bit, but I like to be prepared in my mind at least in a way, right? But I looked at a few different websites and I was kind of like doing a little research on how you can prepare. It's like maybe there are some things that are kind of instinctual, right? But I was kind of looking at a few different. They all had the same sentiments, but kind of in how you prepare, it's like the main important thing is to stay in warm, right? No matter how cold it gets and whether your power shuts out or your heat shuts out, you want to stay warm. So you got to make sure that like you keep it warm indoors with fire, have good proper insulation. You got extra clothing, you're making sure you're putting on as many layers as possible. It's just making sure that you can somehow heat up your home properly when power goes out. Like even if you luckily your heat maybe your power does stay on, make sure you got that heat going because hypothermia and frostbite's a real thing. So just having like the extra clothes, like that's a good baseline to hopefully staying warm. And it's not maybe necessarily that easy, right? But that's one way. Like just making sure you have proper insulation, indoor thermometer, right? That kind of like reads the outdoor temperature. You know what I'm saying from the inside, so you can see what's the temperature is outside and from the inside, so you don't have to go outside. That was a lot of back and forth. But I mean, also just like I think a safety thing, like staying connected with people in a way where you're checking in with loved ones, or maybe you got neighbors that you kind of could you form the Blizzard task force, where you can kind of at least communicate that things are going okay, because that's a pretty big important thing. Just not only yourself, you want to make sure you're okay and letting others know that you're doing fine, but you want to make sure that people around you are okay as well. Making sure that you're like drinking plenty of warm fluids too. But apparently avoiding caffeine and alcohol because that can like bring some, it brings the coldness to your extremities or whatever. So like I mean like hot chocolate or whatever, I guess. But if you can't do that, just literally warm water. I mean, I sit there and just drink warm water to stay not freezing. I think that's fair enough. Like anything to keep the warmness in my body, right? Yeah, avoid traveling. Always avoid traveling. I think that's a smart thing. Just not based off of you can't travel, the roads are closed and nobody's going out, but you don't want to fend for that kind of thing and ruin your vehicle or hurt kill yourself on accident. Sorry. But yeah, dressing properly. That's like I said, staying warm, just dressing properly, keeping things like your nose, your ears kind of covered, your cheeks, your chin. Like the face is really important, it feels like, and toes and stuff like that. Those are like where it gets really cold, and that can be like a really irritating thing. And once your body feels the cold, it's gonna like run through. So keeping that stuff, dry clothing as well, making sure that it's not wet, loose clothing so you don't feel irritated and it's not tight. Your body heat can kind of insulate through this loose clothing, which I kind of thought was smart. It feels like the warmest sweaters or hoodies that I have are like baggier. I have a little more space and it feels like there's a little more room for insulation. My body heat can work. And maybe even like sometimes the backup plan is like I think that was one thing I was reading is knowing where you will go if your home becomes too cold, right? If you don't have a way to heat it, and obviously there's ways to like you can't get out, and hopefully there's emergency, facilities where you are in those snows that they can help you. Because there's places like I know there's like in some of these extreme places they have like warming centers or whatever where they'll like have a place that just always has the heat going, like maybe like a main place in the town or whatever. And or if you have a neighbor, like us, if when you're checking in with other people, then you might know as well. But also just like so I was reading also just gathering emergency supplies, right? It feels like that's a common sense thing a little bit. What supplies though is what I was kind of question, especially when stores are going to be closed, like, and you don't know how necessarily like long you're being snowed in, but you got to think about like having like food and water and medicine, like first aid kits and stuff like that, and also like having like a home kit and a to go kit, which I thought was kind of cool, like making sure you have like a home kit where you have at least like 2 weeks of supplies, even if you don't use all of it, like making sure like you have like in your at home kit you have like warm clothes and you at least have like a gallon of water per person per day type thing, which I mean if you need that much water that's cool, but first aid kit, having just like things like medical supplies like a shovel, ice melting products. I thought that was kind of smart. Just things that you might be able to use to help you prevent like frost, being frozen in. And then like the to-go kit, you're not going to necessarily, if you're going somewhere, you're not going to be hopefully gone for too long, but at least like 3 days of supplies where, just more like, a charger, for your battery, for your devices, like car charger battery or another battery for your car. That kind of makes sense. Like things that are just going to help your transport. But it's just things like that. Like I always think like, I mean, canned foods that works, right? If you're at home, I mean, I ain't against canned food. I'll eat canned foods. I'll eat canned freaking soup and canned like beans and canned whatever. I don't care. They're preserved in canning. It's fine. They'll last. I don't care. I don't need it. But like if I don't know. Like I said, I can't even really fathom completely like being stuck in a snowstorm and being frosted in, frozen. I keep saying frosted in, but frozen in. I can't even think about that. But also just thinking like, yeah, like keeping um something that like I said, besides just a first aid kit, but like learning emergency skills. I think that's a big thing, like learning how to treat frostbite if it gets worse to worse. Testing smoke alarms, making sure that you like that works. So if a fire starts, or carbon monoxide detectors and stuff like that. I think there's just like I was reading that the big sentiment on like a lot of the things I was reading was just be ready to live without power, gas, or water. Right? There's like It's gonna happen even if keep from your pipes from freezing, or you kind of have like, your smoke detector or of that works, you have communication on the outside, you have all these things, your TV works, whatever, but it's just one of the things where like you can do all these things to have backup plans, these generators or whatever, but it doesn't always seem perfect, right? So just just be prepared to live without power and gas, and be prepared to be stuck. And like you can do so much to like clear out your pathway and stuff like that, and like your walkway, your driveway and stuff like that, but you're not necessarily thinking about going anywhere. And how yeah, just the general prep, I think that was a big sentiment too. When you like watching out for alerts, I was reading something about like when you get alerts on your phone or on the TV, if it's a watch, it means to be prepared. If it's a warning, it means to take action, which is fair enough. I think, yeah, once the warning pops up, you know that something's going down. So, but I just can't even like I said, I lived in Minnesota for periods of my life, and when I was younger, I didn't really have to think about the factor of the snow. But when I moved back a few years ago, it was pretty abundant and pretty hectic, and I just can't even think about living. I love the snow, but living where it's like super chaotic, where you're gonna be trapped inside for multiple weeks at a time, and you're gonna have to have supplies and learn how to like, keep yourself warm and all these things. I think survival skills are a good thing to have in general, for sure. Even if you think that you're never gonna be in these situations, I think you should be prepared. It's okay to have a certain level of preparedness. But when in Texas, we might never get a snowstorm, right? Snowstorm. But surviving a blizzard, surviving any sort of extreme weathers is something that I can't even imagine. And like I said, if everybody should have a certain level of survival instinct and a certain level of preparedness. One of the things I want most in life is to have kids, have my own children. I was blessed to have pretty good parents in my life, and I really only want to be able to offer the same to my own kids. I cherish the thoughts of one day being able to have my own legacy continued, and being able to influence my own kid and kin, and just have, like I said, just have kids. I don't know if I'll be a great dad, and I sure as hell know I'm not going to be perfect, but I'm gonna put myself through everything I need to, all the hardships of having kids, to make sure that I do my absolute best, just as my father did and my mom did, tried their best. Having a bunch of mini me's running around will be a sight to see one day, hopefully. And I truly believe I will have children, whether they come from my own blood, right? Or I adopt kids. I'm not against adoption. I just only have a love, for a caring father. I only want to be able to give that love one day. I just I want it so badly, I've slacked a little bit. I just, I'm not in the dating scene. I don't really meet up with people. So it's more on my own, right? Where I'm not out there putting myself out there, and but also just, you know, I just think about I'm also have a lot of self-doubts where I don't know if I'm not a perfect human being, and there's a lot of things I do now that if I think about if I did onto a kid, it would be just like if I was rude to my kid, it just would tear me apart. And like the little things, like I always think about like when kids get sick, right? That just tears my heart apart. But one day I want to be a father. And I want to have a lot of kids. I want to have as many as possible. But at least two. That would be. I always say that I'm gonna have twins. So if I could have two, that'd be great. I've always loved kids for sure. Growing up, I've had younger cousins, so I've always kind of had the little kids around me, and you're kind of forced into being good with kids in a way, and it kind of always feels like I've just had that connection a little bit. And I have a niece and nephew. My niece is 10 and my nephew's 6. Sorry, yeah, 6. Is he 6 or 5? 6. Sorry. But I love those two. I think they're awesome, Johanna and Theo. They're two of the best kids, and having them around, it just makes me want kids more. And just kind of thinking about continuing on this kind of familial legacy in a way where at least like I just think about having offset, not even if it's some grand thing where I have some wealth to give or some sort of business to pass on. It's just thinking about like my name continuing, and thinking about kind of me being referred to in kind of the past, in the history of my family. Just as like we talk about some of our relatives that aren't around anymore. My parents, even though they weren't together and they had their own struggles with each other, they were good parents. And like they had personal things and it's hard to deal with personal problems and be a good parent, right? But they always knew like put me and my siblings first and they tried their very best at times and like I said it wasn't easy and me and my siblings tried to be really good. Me and my sisters really tried to be as best kids as we can, but it's not like I said, it's not always perfect. Things are just going to happen, right? But my parents were good, and I think I have such a luxury with that I have these just some of the best parents. It makes me want to be good to my own kids. It kind of also makes me a little hopeful in a way where like I did pick up on a lot of things my parents did, and especially as I've gotten older, I've been able to kind of look back more and say like, "Oh yeah, I really appreciated the way this was, and I really appreciated how this happened in my life." And so it does give me a little like a little hope and a little faith in that I can be a good dad. I could be a good parent. Because not just a good dad, like I said, not just a good dad on my own, but being able to co-parent with someone and being a good parent for, not only for my own kid, but being for my, my a significant other. Sorry, I don't know. I just had like a brain freeze there. But but I think as most parents do, as most new parents or people kind of have, they have these self doubts. Really, like, am I ready? And am I deserving? Can I give things to my kids? Give them everything that I didn't have, or give them everything I do have? It just even like downing yourself as a person, your morals, and if you feel like you can handle emotion and feel like you're a good person, and can you be sympathetic for a child? I I'm sometimes I maybe even question that people don't realize it already, right? Until you have a kid, like it kind of gets thrown on you, and maybe you realize all of a sudden. A lot of people don't. I don't. It feels like don't ever realize that there's some shitty parents out there, but I don't think you can really ever know. You kind of think like you can't handle your life or life is a little weird and so you don't want to have kids or you don't feel like it's like there's ever a good time, but maybe just having them is like the best time just doing it. Like it's not as easy. Obviously you got to have someone to have kids with, but you never know how big you're going to step up or how much you're going to change when you have kids. You don't know that until you do. And all these new worries with having kids, right? Like you have another person's life all of a sudden. You worry about like them getting sick and you worry about their general health and getting hurt and stuff like that. It tears my heart up to think about just like my kid throwing up in the middle of the night and me having to like it's okay, dude, just crying my eyes out like they're like comforting me. But also like going to school, like making sure you're picking the right schools and making sure that you're teaching them life lessons like as they come maybe as they come up you don't want to like scare your kid with life lessons necessarily but making sure that you just let kids experience things and teach them these things and don't let them like mess up and say like well how does that feel and da 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 or whatever. There's so much overstressing and overcautiousness with kids and I think that's fair. I don't think that's an unnormal thing. I mean, it's with everything in life, you're gonna stress about something, right? So what makes kids different? And like I said, another person's life. You don't want to play with that. So caution is best intended for sure. And I know that I know I'm gonna have the mentality of, kids come first. That's always kind of the idea is as long as I'm putting my kids first and I take responsibility, then that's okay, right? Like I'm responsible for their life forming in a way. Monkey see, monkey do, right? They're gonna see what I do and they're gonna listen to what I say, and that's big responsibility. And I, I I'm not always perfect in understanding the things I do, right? And I'm not always patient with myself, and so it's kind of it's a struggle to sometimes think about then having to pass on these things to my kid when I don't even have it figured out right now. But as I kind of often think with like a lot of the struggles I think with my thoughts in all the things I'm thinking about when I put them out there it feels a lot better when I kind of verbalize them it feels a lot better. And maybe if I kind of objective kind of like just take myself away from a scenario and I'm kind of teaching my kids something I could kind of look at it as I'm away from the situation and I'm just telling it as like a straightforward reality. And then maybe that kind of just makes me look at something a little different. I just like it, like I said, there's a whole patience with like taking this time to like, form this kid's life and letting them also experience things on their own to the extent to they can learn things on what they, to their capabilities. Teamwork, and I don't question teamwork with another parent. I think like you have to accept that before even having a kid. Just being the person you're gonna have a kid with, that's a big responsibility in its own. And people do change when kids happen. I mean, they do, and you don't know how someone's gonna react, but you do your best to have that teamwork, to have that syncopation with another person. You gotta big thing with my parents, like my dad's especially, is he kind of let me just do things. He let me and my siblings kind of wander. You gotta let kids wander in a way. You let them be them. It's I always say in the kind of the way that you let them touch the fire to know it's hot. You gotta let them run into the wall to know it's hard. You gotta know they gotta jump off the edge of something to know how far down it is. So you gotta let kids do it, and that's hard. That's a big thing, is like you kind of want to be that barrier for, because you know how you maybe handled something and you see how other people have handled things. So you want to have that kind of direction for them. But discovery is the big part of childhood. It's you got to literally let kids discover emotions and discover like the bads and the goods and let them do that. They got it because eventually they're gonna have to learn on their own. They're When you're not around anymore. I mean, parenting never really stops. Maybe, right? I mean, I'm 27 and I really rely on my dad a lot. But I'm lame. Whatever. But it's one of those things where he's okay with it. I don't take advantage of him, and I think about like I'll take care of my kids into their 40s. I don't give a shit. Like as long as they respect me, and I always have this love for them, which I will. That's my due diligence as a parent. Then who cares? As I'm always going to be there for them, because like I'm going to be a little further ahead in life than them, right? So they're going to want to know things and they're going to want to know how to handle situations. As long as my dad's around, even when I have my own independence and at times when I can do my own thing, like I'm still going to go to him for things because he just knows a little bit more about life. He doesn't know everything. To me, he knows everything, but it's just one of those things where like he just has a little bit further experience in life, right? But, overall, I just think about how I'd parent. It's just, I had a good experience with my parents, so I would do the same thing. My parents weren't necessarily gentle parents, right? I don't know this whole gentle parenting thing. I mean, I understand getting your kids' emotions. That's like a whole important thing, right? And my mom and dad were very much so. They understood my emotions, but it's like they weren't gentle necessarily. They weren't super controlling, but they also were like very realist. They would tell me how life was gonna be, but let me experience it as I go along, type thing. They didn't like give me the blinders and childproof things around my house. So that I just would. I think I would be the same way, and I think I'm a little bit of a black and white, pretty blunt person, and so I don't know how much sugarcoating I would do with my kids. I don't think I would. I'm gonna be talking to my baby like a grown ass adult. Like I'm not gonna be using. I mean, I love the baby voice. I talk to my cats with a baby voice, so I'm gonna use the baby voice. But I'm gonna try my best to like communicate as thoroughly as possible so they understand. I just hopefully I'll be able to recognize my child's feelings and recognize their energies and their emotions. And I think that's a big thing with like you kind of just it's with living with someone or just spending a lot of time with someone. That's just something that you hopefully pick up naturally. Hopefully, I'm just so much intertwined with my kid, and we just so intact that I could just pick up on things, and they also that comfortability of coming up to me and asking me things. I mean, I always felt comfortable asking my parents for advice. I always did, and they always gave me advice. And if they didn't know anything, then they were honest with me. They just like would tell me they didn't know this thing. They didn't ever lie to me, and they would encourage me to go ask someone else. That was always a big thing. And I want to have a lot of kids. Like, I want to have 4 kids, hopefully. I mean, I want to have twins right off the bat. I always say that I'm going to have twins. I speak it to it into it. I speak it to into existence. Sorry, I speak it into existence. But on my mom's side of the family, I have 2 sets of twin cousins, which is pretty funny. And so I think it's a plausibility. I think it's very plausible. And like I said, I speak into it existence a lot. overall, it doesn't matter how many kids I have. If I can have two, that's great. If I can have one, that's amazing. If I have to adopt, I'm okay with that. I think about adoption all the time. I have no shame in that. It's about taking care of another person. I can do that. I just I just know, right? As we should all know that you just got to do your best and take care of problems when they happen, right? You have experiences from your own childhood, and whether they're good or bad, hopefully you can take that and learn to nurture your child in a certain way. You got to teach them as they come, and nothing comes easy. Like I said, you use references from your parents, all the goods and bads, and you just got to let your kids be kids, and you got to let them wander. And at times it's gonna hurt to see them get hurt, right, and be sick, and hey, it's gonna hurt to have them learn these lessons as you did, but you just that's how it has to be. And like I said, I'm always gonna remember to do my best. And for everybody out there that wants kids just like me, or you have kids, you're a new parent, you got to just try to do your best. And what you're doing right now is your best. As long as you're not hurting that child, and you're just doing everything to take care of them and nurture them as best as you can, I think that's very important to remember, that that's important about being a parent, is just doing what you can for that child. I have dreams, kind of like maybe aspirations more so, to one day be involved in making movies or writing, filming, acting, whatever, just making movies. Film is something that I absolutely love. I tend to find a bit of variety in everything that I view, and through all these different genres. I love the things that I love, the movies that I love, right? There's a reason I love them. I love coming up with stories and seeing how they can be conceptualized, and I'm always kind of trying to come up with ideas for movies. And with getting closer to the Christmas season, I've been watching a lot of different Christmas movies, right? And that's something that helps me with like putting myself into that holiday spirit. Like, that's one of my favorite things, is to during the holidays, is to watch Christmas movies. There are a ton of amazing movies that like transcend just being a good Christmas movie. They have beautiful stories and amazing characters, amazing filming, amazing acting, whatever, tons of varieties that can make it what you want. And I was sitting around, and I was kind of started, like, you see some trends in Christmas movies, right? And you see like kind of how the formula for Christmas movies, and I kind of started thinking about some of my own ideas. And I started thinking about, like, could I write a Christmas movie? So I decided, I sat down and gave the roughest draft I could on writing my own Christmas movie. I haven't found out a name for it at all. It's literally the roughest draft ever. I don't know how well this topic's necessarily going to sound or go, but I thought it'd be kind of fun to maybe talk about this Christmas movie. It's pretty cheesy. I tried to think about certain like tropes you see in certain Christmas movies, right? So I tried my best to like throw in a couple things and take maybe a little bit from this movie, this story, that story. But won't you tune in with me to read out my rendition of my own Christmas movie? Like, please be easy on me. If you enjoy this, I appreciate it. If you don't, then I don't have any hate on you. I understand. But I kind of had the idea of, I don't know how it's gonna start necessarily, but you start with like a happy, good-hearted family, as most Christmas movies are, right? You got a mom, you got a dad, and then I was thinking like three kids. That always seems like the perfect amount of siblings. Unfortunately, this one Christmas that it'll start out on, the oldest sibling dies for some reason. I don't know necessarily. Maybe they were in college, and they were coming to back to the town for Christmas or whatever, or maybe they were like, the siblings were out sledding on a hill or something like that, and one of them like crashes into a tree or something like that, which would be which would be a little harsh, but that's like perfect for a Christmas movie. But the oldest sibling dies, and I kind of think that, like, after that, like, things kind of go downhill in the family's fortune away. Maybe like one parent dies after the year after from like cancer, and then maybe like the next year a parent dies in an accident or something like that, all around Christmas time. And that's a lot of death for the start of a Christmas movie. I understand that, and but I love thinking about just starting out in a kind of a downish mood and building it up from there, especially in this Christmas mode, right? Kind of like in a Wonderful Life type scenario. But I kind of had the idea that there's like the two siblings are left, right, and they've kind of lived this like different lives, right? One has been like this super prosperous, rich kind of sibling, and one is a little bit more poor and maybe more humbled, whereas the rich one's a little more selfish or whatever. And over the years, they've kind of like grown apart or whatever. They just don't have that family anymore, and they just don't have that cheer anymore. And as their family has kind of been ripped apart, they feel as the same way as being ripped apart type thing, which is just a little drama, a little sadness to add into the story. It's something. It's with two amazing siblings. It's something I just don't ever want to think about growing apart from them, right? And maybe like the rich one moved away, right? And the poor sibling kind of stayed behind, and the poor sibling stayed behind his struggles, but never says anything, right? And never burdens the rich sibling with anything. Never asks them for money. Never tells him, hey, to come back to town and please help me out and all this stuff. And never says anything. And maybe like something overall with the town is kind of going wrong, kind of like A Wonderful Life. I mean, I did rip off. I mean, not rip off, but I took a lot of inspiration. That's one of my favorite Christmas movies and one of the more emotional ones. But so like they just don't have a lot of communication because things are never going right for maybe the poor sibling, so they don't ever want to say anything, right? And the rich sibling has their own life they're wrapped up in their own life, and even though they're a little more selfish, maybe they don't have to be selfish, right? They're just so busy. Maybe it's like one of those things where they just got wrapped up in this scenario, and they've kind of just kept going and kept making it, and it's really only not in a selfish way, but maybe more so in a way to distract themselves from like life, and they just don't even want to think about going back to town or anything like that. And like it's like one of those things where both of them maybe don't even have time to spend on their own lives. So even the rich sibling is like always kind of pushing forward and kind of wrapped up in the business life and da 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 this, and the poor sibling always is like helping out other people or has his own family that he started and he's trying to help out. And so there's not a lot of time maybe that they have for each other. But then, like, I kind of thinking about like you fast forward a little, a few years from when the start of the movie, and I don't know how the exposition of like kind of the background of the siblings kind of will happen. Maybe a couple flashbacks, flash through memories, kind of thing. But I'm kind of thinking the main thing is like one Christmas specifically, the poor sibling is like at their worst. They've like recently lost their job and like their home burnt down. Or it's like I'm trying to think. I'm trying to think tragic. You know what I'm saying? And like they finally decide to reach out to the richer sibling, and the rich sibling is like caught up in something and kind of misses a few calls and misses texts, and he wants to answer maybe, or they want to answer, and they just can't, right? Because they haven't seen each other like in X amount of years, right? They tried keeping together, right? But it's this guilt that kind of sets in where like I haven't seen them in a long time. I don't want them to know this, and I don't want them to see that I'm this busy and I don't have I think that way. Or poor siblings, like I don't want them to see me miserable type thing. But I'm thinking like, so he misses all these calls, and then maybe like the next morning he gets a call that the his sibling died. I don't know necessarily more death. I don't know necessarily how. Maybe I don't know. I don't want to think like maybe suicide. Like sorry, it just would be like because like maybe he just doesn't want to like take on the burdens anymore, and it's not just like about leaving. That's that's a tough thing to think, but when everything's in a downward spiral, like, you don't want to be around and you feel like you're the problem. Maybe that's kind of the evolution of the poor sibling is like he's always tried his best, but maybe he started to feel like he was the problem, right? But then like that kind of maybe leads the rich sibling on this kind of downward spiral the whole day. He doesn't show up for work, people are calling and texting him more, and he's just kind of in this state of like shock, right? And then maybe he kind of has like this thing of like, I should have been there. I should have been. Why didn't I answer him? This kind of like jerking himself into a grave type thing. And then here you go. Here's the twist. All of a sudden he gets a knock on the door, right? kind of in like the frame of like a Christmas Carol, right? The A visitor, a mysterious visitor. And I think at the door is the sibling, the older sibling that had passed away. I'm just saying, coming back as like an angel, like in A Wonderful Life, like Clarence, you know what I'm saying? So the older sibling comes back and looks exactly like the same as they were the last time the rich sibling remembers them. And it's like a total, like, right, maybe like, like, rich sibling passes out, right? Like, faints or whatever. To, add a little humor. It could be lighthearted humor. It doesn't have to always be depressing, Gunther. God dang. But maybe like the older sibling tells the sibling like, "Hey, there's a chance. Like you can, make things different. You can, I know you're feeling this guilt, but there's a way we can, shift this guilt." And so, there's people that were, so theoretically, if the poor sibling died, right, there's people that the poor sibling unfortunately left behind in a way, right? Not just in maybe his own family, or their own family. I'm not a boy or girl. I'm not, discriminating. But there's all of a sudden these things that are kind of left behind because the poor sibling is no longer around. So I think kind of the rich sibling, along with like the angel, older sibling, they head back to hometown to see what it is, to see how it is. And maybe they notice that like that it's kind of the same. It's just kind of stuck in in this time frame, and it makes the rich sibling maybe a little happier knowing that nothing's gotten worse. And he starts to kind of ask around, and he realizes that the sibling's done a lot, but there's still a lot that more needs to be done. Poor sibling has kind of left behind people, and the rich sibling has the ability now to make amends, right? Do the things that this poor sibling was doing, not only helping the poor sibling's own family, but helping the people around town. Because maybe that was the poor sibling's whole mentality, was this selflessness, like giving his last dollar to someone who needed it more, or spending their free time helping someone with something else type thing, right? So the rich sibling kind of makes amends, and he kind of starts to maybe like, reach out, and he starts to help out everybody that relied on his sibling, and maybe starts to kind of make this town a little better, and starts like helping people rebuild something, or helps this and helps this person out. And I think I kind of like that's kind of like the Grinch, and like where the cold heart maybe grows a little bit. I don't The rich sibling doesn't have to be necessarily like selfish, but maybe just because he's kind of been ignorant to what's happening, he starts to kind of realize, oh, he has that common sense more so. Not the heart that grows, but the common sense. And I kind of like the idea that maybe the mom and dad show up at some time too, like he visits the grave of like his parents, and they kind of show up or whatever, and they kind of tell him like, hey, like we really appreciate what you've done or whatever. And it's like, I don't know. I kind of It's like it's hard. It'd be kind of weird to throw them all in all of a sudden, but I kind of like the at least the older sibling, But I kind of there's this idea that I kind of get stuck at this part where then eventually, like, what happens, like, does he make the town better, right? And he kind of has like, after the town's kind of he's planning on leaving, he's spent as much time as there as he possibly can because he has to go back to work type thing. And so, but as he's before he leaves, that he doesn't get to go back with his older sibling, and his or maybe his mom and dad who came back as well, maybe it's all this thing where it's like, before he's leaving, but they can't leave because the town is kind of their place. It's their resting place, right? So he has this big apology for his negligence, and this big crying out and saying like, I'm so sorry. And they kind of give him the assurance that like, don't worry, like things are different, trust me, you've done enough. Like, it's almost like he never left type thing. So that'll be like like a mystical, like, kind of a, message, right? And so like, they promise, and then like before they disappear, and he like has to move and or go back to his like where he was. Maybe they give him like, you'll have a surprise when you get back. Don't worry. And so he like, maybe he travels back into, I don't know how he got there in a plane, whatever. But he gets back. He gets back at night. He goes to sleep, and he's tired and whatever, and he goes to sleep, and but he wakes up the next morning, and all of a sudden he gets a phone call, and he's kind of, phone call, okay. And he realizes that on the phone it's the same day as the call that he got about his poor sibling, his other sibling, the poor sibling having died. And so he's kind of weirded out, and he answers like in a hurry, and he hears the poor sibling's voice. I keep saying it's so rude to say poor sibling, but I didn't have names. Okay. But he hears the sibling's voice, right? And immediately just starts crying out and saying like, like, "Oh my god, I'm so happy to hear from you." And poor sibling's like, "Well, I'm happy that I need help. Like, I really do." And so then, like, it's like an immediately emotional thing, right? And the older the rich sibling says like, "Oh, I'll come and get you. Like, you sit right there. I'll come back. Like, no problems. Like, I'll come and get you." And so he, like, grabs his sibling and like picks up him as the sibling and like the family and maybe a few like extended like scraggler family members type thing, right? And he brings them to his place. The rich sibling brings all of them to his place, and tells a story of like their sibling being visited, or the older sibling coming and visiting him, and talking about this like terrible story about how he had died. And maybe it's like a kind of like a heart to heart, and they are like separated from the rest of the group type thing. But and the poor sibling is like, says that he wishes he would have reached out sooner, right? And I just don't know how to end it at this point. I kind of think like, would you respond to that story when you hear it, and like, well, I'm not dead, type thing. So but at least I don't know. Like I said, that I get stuck at the ending here, but a lot of that I just it's I took a lot from a different couple different movies, right? And I kind of like that idea of kind of familiarity, like maybe necessarily maybe Christmas was super important to this one time like whole family, but they were always really close. And Christmas is a time for family and closeness. So when the family started kind of breaking apart and everybody started dying or whatever, that's kind of tough to think that the two remaining siblings kind of grew apart. And it doesn't have to be because the rich sibling was selfish or anything, but maybe because he just got so wrapped up, and poor sibling just never felt like he had the ability to say anything, or they. I keep saying him, but it doesn't have to be a he. But like I said, I just don't know how to end it. I kind of like the idea of maybe like I said, the rich sibling kind of tells the story, and the poor sibling's kind of like confused, but like, you know, mom maybe says something kind of like, mom, dad, and yada yada. The older sibling would be proud to know that you've come this way, and I'm sorry that I reach out sooner, and like they give like a big embrace at the end, like a hug that everybody feels through the screen type thing. But yeah, it's a little rambling. I'm sorry. I tried to do my best to be as concise with my ideas, but these are the type of things I love thinking about. I love thinking up stories, and I did pull, like I said, I pulled a couple ideas from certain stories, and it's not a very good ending, but I would one day love to not only film like a Christmas movie, but just make movies in general. And I would like to maybe further episodes talk about more movie ideas that I have. I think it's a pretty fun idea to come up with stories, and I encourage everybody to try to do that same thing. Like, even if you're not actively making films, right, or you're not actively in that process, at least coming up with stories can be a good thing. One of the most chaotic parts of the holidays is for sure traveling. If you do travel during the holidays, not everybody's family lives in the same place, right? And sometimes you just want to go on your own Christmas adventure. So, traveling is something that a lot of people do every year. Every year there's millions of people that flood into airports to zoom across the nation to whatever destinations they want to go to, whatever they choose. And those couple weeks before Christmas are like, it feels like, are like designated for absolute hell to break loose, you know what I'm saying? With the chaos of the sheer number of people and kind of the oodles amounts of stress that kind of happen, it's just too hectic. It's so much chaos. You got to make sure that tickets are good, and check your bags in and make sure you get past security and everybody's got their stuff, and maybe you're accounting for multiple people. The list goes on. But after all you do, all that stuff you endure, hopefully you have a pretty beautiful Christmas wherever you decide to go for Christmas. I've traveled for Christmas before, usually just to go see family. I've never done anything like extreme and going away from like going to somewhere tropical or seeing somewhere super Christmassy. But there's tons of reason that people travel during the holiday season, right? It's you're going to visit family. Like I said, not everybody lives in the same state, and as you get a little older, as my family has gotten older, we all live in different places. So you try your best to go try to visit family, and people try to come to visit you or whatever. Also, just thinking about maybe getting away. I think about, if you live in somewhere I was talking about earlier, blizzards and snowstorms, if you live in a place like that, I can understand wanting to get away from that weather, going towards like a nicer, warmer climate, or or at least to somewhere less hectic, right? Or maybe you're psycho and you want to go towards the winter activities. Well, that's not psycho. I mean, like, there's plenty of places which I'll touch on in a second that kind of have that like wintry vibe that people travel to every year, just as much as people travel to tropical situations. But also just thinking about like, maybe you're trying to participate in the winter activities, so you got to go where the winter activities are. If you don't have skiing and snow, snowboarding and skiing and sledding around your place, we got to go to where it is. And or like I said, you just want to get away. I can think about that, right? It maybe just kind of like you don't have a lot of family around, and you kind of have this freedom during the holidays, and you just kind of need that rejuvenation. You just want to like go sit somewhere, and just as like any other kind of vacation holiday season, right? It's just another vacation for you. But inevitably, undoubtedly, when it comes to traveling, there's going to be a lot of planning. You have so many things to kind of take into account, not only with your own stuff when it comes to, like I said, tickets and making sure you got all your baggage and your luggage packed up, you got every bit of clothing you need, and the batteries. And think about that, like if you have like a spouse, right? That's a whole nother person to worry about. And then make it, maybe you got kids, you got like 5 kids or something like that, and they all got their own stuff, and they got tablets and headphones, and yeah, you know what I'm saying? It gets pretty hectic. You got pets or something like that. It's pretty. It takes a lot of planning, and especially the further you kind of go away, like it kind of feels like there's a little bit more because it's you're less close to where your home base is or whatever. And then usually it's an extended stay, right? So it's so much planning, and over 100 million travelers per year, right? That's intense. That is so many freaking people. And so just thinking about having to navigate that, that's part of the planning, right? And 30% of people plan an end of year trip around the world. 30%. And over 25% of people prefer to travel over, abroad, which is crazy to think about too. So that takes, I mean, that's not, I mean, some people kind of just go on the whim and can kind of have things work out, but I'm not like that. I can't go on a whim. I got to make sure that plan is stacked. You know what I'm saying? I don't think I can, sometimes I can't really relinquish that control. But at the end of the day, you just kind of have to relinquish it, right? I mean, you can do as much planning as you want, but things are going to happen regardless. But I was looking up a couple couple locations for most popular places, and I was kind of surprised by some of them. Like some of them, like I mean, Honolulu, right, or Cape Town or Key West. Those places I'm not. Those are like tropical places, and I'm not surprised. But then places like Prague or Aspen or Vienna or Helsinki, those places are kind of like they're not tropical, they're more wintry, but apparently those places are more popular because they look kind of like they have the winter wonderland look, and it's a little bit of that old gothic kind of look, especially I think like Helsinki, right? That's kind of my vibe is I think that I wouldn't want to travel away from the weather, but I travel a little bit to where like the weather looks best, dude, Go to like New York and like look at Central Park during the snow and see, yeah, that's a little tamed in the dreams, but it's still cool to think, just going somewhere and seeing where the vibes maybe are a little bit more. There were some tips though that I tried to do research, I tried to do my best, and there's so many websites that kind of just reiterate the same stuff, right? But um, it always seems like there was a couple things to think about. Is like always the busiest is during the day before the holiday. Literally, it feels like the busiest days are maybe like a couple of days before. There's always kind of chaos for the couple weeks before, but those first like those 2 days before the Christmas Eve and the day before that are the most hectic. And it's intense to think about like everybody flooding in at that time. I'd make sure that I try to plan a couple of days before that and a couple days after type thing. But I'm also people are dropping like an average of $1,000 per person for travel, so it's money is well spent, and you're saving up the whole year. And $1,000 is quite a monetary commitment, right? So you're kind of hoping everything's going right. You definitely do, but that's a lot of money, and I think obviously it's because everybody's traveling, and so tickets are going to be cheap, and to get there and everything to be on time and scheduled, it's going to take a little bit of that compensation. That's understood. But I think I was reading important to remember is like taking early day flights. Earliest in the day as possible is always best, and that's tough when you got like family and other people to worry about. But let's say you're a solo traveler, Take that like like that dawn, the break of dawn type flight, the 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock. Make those flights. I understand that too. A couple years ago, not for Christmas, but for during the summer, I went to Chicago. And I took an early ass flight. I 100% did. I got to Chicago. It was the same time zone, so it doesn't like nothing really changed. But I got there by like the afternoon, so I had like the nighttime to go mess around and do stuff, which was great. But also makes you feel like you can settle in a little easier. But I'm also maybe an obvious thing, but booking in advance, I think always seems the best. Is like if you know that you're going to take that December trip and that Christmas trip, make sure that you're booking a few months in advance. I feel like that's a pretty common sense thing, but it's important to make sure you maybe remember that for sure. I also read somewhere that sometimes deals can happen last minute. So if you're someone that's not necessarily like holding out on traveling, like if you got obviously plan ahead if you're going to see someone and it's like something bigger, but if you're like just like on a whim type thing, then look for those last minute deals. Shoot. You know what I'm saying? Those like Christmas Eve deals, buy that ticket, for $100 type thing. Less than that, that'd be crazy. I don't think that'd happen, but that's crazy. But thinking even about like I was reading about like if you know that this one airport's going to be super busier than the other airport, then maybe thinking about like alternating to a different airport. We have like DFW here, like it's a pretty big airport, but Love Field is it gets busy, but the thinking maybe that's more plausible, ain't that bad. And maybe if you have to travel a little bit to get to a different airport, I don't maybe Texas is a little harder because everything's a little spread out and it's like the bigger cities are a little spread out, but yeah, thinking about an alternate airport maybe not a bad idea, especially if you know like a lot of people go or a lot that it's not surrounded by a lot of people, yada yada yada. But ultimately, it was saying I read it on a couple different websites. It said ultimately plan for the worst, which I guess like I think you should always maybe have certain mindset of like something could go wrong, especially in the chaoticness of this season. But ultimately plan for the worst. Just let it, if it fails, things get canceled. You forget your ticket or something like that. Plan for the worst, which is fair enough. Not everything's going to be perfect. People are going to be, hectic and chaotic, and so it makes sense to prepare for that. But traveling by plane is like the most common way. It feels like that's kind of what people mostly do, right? But I mean, I wouldn't want to think about traveling by roads, right? Because thinking about like traveling by roads would be just like road closures, ice, traffic. It just like not everywhere is accessible like that, and 35 million people travel by the road every year. So I mean that's a lot, but it's not as much as like airports. 100 million travelers through airports. You know what I'm saying? And planes, it gets expensive and stuff like that. And you think like most people prefer planes, like when they travel they prefer it, but I think that's probably the safest way, especially when you think about like road closures and stuff like that. I've traveled on the road during the winter and it's not fun at all. It's no point to it. It's like might as well just stay home. No. But there's so many goods and bads when it comes to traveling for Christmas, right? Or travel for the holidays in general, you think about like eventually when you get to your destination and everything's worked out and you get to see your family or you go on your little Christmas adventure or whatever. Then you think all the goods worked out. Everything was okay, but like when you plan for the worst and maybe some things don't work out, the ticket, something's bad with the ticket or you forgot your luggage or your flight was canceled and that's tough too. And I think with most things, obviously you could probably weigh the goods and bads, right? So just as with anything, traveling for Christmas with the hecticness, the things that are really out of your control, it feels like like I said, you can do a lot of planning, right? Traveling for Christmas takes a lot of planning and you could do as much as you want and have everything prepared, but there are some external factors that can stop you and when worst comes to worst, you can't blame it, especially when it's the most hectic travel time of the year. I love the thinking about like I said I'm gonna travel one day. I don't doubt it. I'm gonna have my own family one day, my own wife. Have a wife and kids, and I'm gonna have to travel one day, undoubtedly. Maybe not, maybe so. But it's like one of those things where it's you have to be prepared, and you kind of have to just kind of lean into the chaoticness of the Christmas season. Alrighty, friends. That's really all I have to say about that. Episode 37 in the books, all done. I appreciate everybody for tuning in. If you want to listen to this episode or any of my other episodes or any of my future episodes, I always make sure to put them on YouTube or Spotify or both of them. If you want to listen to any of them or enjoy any of them, then those are the best places to check them out under the Odd Thoughts podcast. If you found it relatable at all, or like I said, you enjoyed it at all, then I appreciated it if you subscribe to the podcast on YouTube, follow me on Spotify. You could also follow me on a bunch of different social media platforms. I'm on Instagram. I'm also on Facebook. And I also have a Twitter. I'll make sure to link all those in the video description below, as well as in like my channel description and just generally in like my bio. But yeah, I appreciate the chance to get to talk up on the microphone to everybody. I'm kind of hoping that I'll have maybe one or two more episodes for the end of the December. Maybe one. It'll be around Christmas, but I'm kind of maybe thinking that I'll have one before the beginning of 2024, or I'll just wait for 2024. But nonetheless, I love y'all. I appreciated everybody for tuning in. Please show up for yourselves every day and be excellent to each other.